Hey guys and girls, welcome back to BBR Suspension. Today we've got a slightly different project that we're working on. This is a radiator expansion tank from a Italjet Dragstar 180 scooter. Now this specific tank is a replica, it's not the original. The original tanks have been discontinued by Italjet, you can't get them. And the problem with the original tanks is that they don't have a very long lifespan. The plastic that was used is clearly a slightly inferior quality, and they don't last very long. So there's quite a substantial amount of these scooters that are non-operational due to a tiny little part like this. So this is actually for Adrian and John out at Urban Riders again. They had this tank 3D printed, but unfortunately it doesn't withstand the heat and the pressure. So what we're going to do is we are going to put together some aluminium tanks today. So basically in front of me you can see we've had some of the aluminium bits water jet cut and bent up. So the idea is the various parts will go together something like this, and that will form the tank. Okay, so we're going to be welding these up a little bit later. What we need to do first, however, we need to turn up the filler neck and the two hose connections. So we'll get cracking with that in a second on the lathe behind me. Once we got those done, we'll prep everything and then we can start tacking the tank together. So what we'll be doing is we'll be welding the filler neck on the inside of this plate, and the reason being, once the cap is on this tank, there's a panel that sits approximately 5 or 6 millimeters above the cap. So we don't have space to make the neck longer and do the weld on the outside. So what we're going to be doing is we'll do the weld on the inside, and that's why the top section is loose. We'll do the weld on the inside, we'll then tack the tank together, weld it up, and then do the pipe connections last. And then right at the end we'll just do the side tabs. That I need to still get some material, but we'll get cracking with the rest of the tanks along. So without further ado, let's get cracking on the lathe. Right, guys and girls, we've turned out the filler necks. So as you can see, the cap will screw onto that filler neck. Okay, that filler neck is going to, like I explained earlier on, we'll be clicking that in and we'll be welding these on the inside. Okay, so that we keep the actual overall height of the filler neck here low enough that we don't nudge the top panel. Once that's welded in, we'll then be welding the box or the tank itself together. So with aluminium, there's a simple rule. In fact, there's three: clean, clean, and clean. So what we're going to do, we're going to be cleaning everything with some acetone to prep for welding. And what we'll do is we'll start by firstly wiping down all the sheet metal parts, and then we're going to give the filler necks, and we've also spun up the little hose adapters or connectors. And what we'll be doing, we'll be cleaning all of these with some acetone. the acetone is quite an important, or cleaning with acetone is quite an important step, because what basically happens is with aluminium, any impurity or dirt will contaminate the weld. Okay, so we'll be giving everything a good wipe. What I've done off camera is all the edges where the parts were water jet cut, I've sanded down, because the water jet process involves adding a abrasive media into the water, which is what actually does the cutting. And that abrasive media is normally a glass or a garnet powder or bead. And what happens is, if you don't get all of that off, it'll contaminate the weld and you'll be sitting with leaks on the tank. So what we're doing is we're giving everything a good wipe down with acetone, making sure there's no dirt left on it. And then we'll clean up the filler necks shortly, and then we can start welding. So I'll just give this a good wipe down and give the filler necks a good scrub. I normally use an old toothbrush just to be able to get in the threads. Obviously, when we were machining the threads, I've used cutting oils on the lathe, and those oils are generally a problem because the carbon in oil reacts with heat and it comes out of the oil and it creates impurities in the weld, and you'll get black spots in the weld. So what we'll do is we'll give those a scrub with acetone. Make sure there's also a little bit of the dye chem, which I use when we were doing the threads, the blue dye. That's just so that we can see where the tool is running. With aluminium, it's quite reflective, so it just makes it easier on the lathe to see. So we'll give those a clean, and then the same on the little hose adapters. We'll give those a little clean. I'm actually going to dunk them, put them into a cap full of acetone and just give them a swirl. Get all the old cutting oil off. Make sure everything is as clean as we can possibly get it. And then we should have no problems when it comes to the welding. So we'll give these parts a quick rub down, and then we'll get set up for welding. So with aluminium, welding aluminium it's actually not that difficult. In fact, if somebody had to ask me if they wanted to learn how to weld, I'd say start with aluminium, because if you can weld aluminium, you can weld anything. And once you got the technique right, it's not a very difficult thing to do. It just does take some practice. I've been TIG welding for probably about 25 years. Aluminium I haven't been doing for that long. I'd say probably about 12 years of the 25. And when I started welding aluminium, it was quite a challenge because I wasn't 100% sure of the technique, and I did teach myself how to weld aluminium. And then after a couple of months of practicing, started to get better and better. And with welding, it's like playing golf. The more you practice, the better you will get. So if you want to learn, get started. Don't be afraid if you botch up the first few jobs. That's normal, but take some scraps and practice, and you'll get the gist of it. Right, I'm going to, this is the last plate, and then I'll wash the filler necks and the little connectors, and then we can get cracking with the welding. So I'll wash those quickly off camera, and I'll see you shortly under the hood. Right, so that's the first one done. We'll nudge that out the way and let it cool. And we'll quickly do the second one, making sure everything's clean. We'll get the second one done, and then we'll give those a few minutes to cool off, and then we'll start tacking the actual tank together. we're going to try and take this corner. It's some heaters making it pull a little bit. We'll try and take it without any filler. See if we can get it just to pull. There we go. That's perfect. Opposite corner, we can just push out a smidge. Just take a teeny bit of that corner of the file. Perfect. Opposite corner, we can just push out a smidge. Just take a teeny bit of that corner of the file. We'll let that one pull off of that. Do some other one. Do that the next side. Right guys, so the camera battery went flat while I was welding, so didn't manage to get where I was welding the little tube connections on, but basically I'm pretty happy how these turned out. Came out really neat, and I'm just going to let them cool off a little bit. They are a tad warm still. I can feel the heat through the gloves. Aluminium does hold heat for a little bit. It's a good conductor. So I'm going to let them cool off, give them a wipe down with acetone, and get them back to Adrian and Jean. The one thing I just have to do is the little tabs on the side. But I did speak to Adrian and he said it might not be necessary. They are trying to look at making a cradle to hold these. So maybe job's done. I'm happy, looks good. So thanks for watching as always, and we'll catch you in the next video. Take care for now. Cheers.